I was there when it happened, in that house. When the screams stopped and the walls gained new secrets, I watched madness take John day by day, saw his eyes change into something hollow. They say the dead tell no tales. They're wrong. Now I alone know what happened in that house, what lies behind the walls. Listen closely. Welcome to Phobia, a podcast about horror, true crime, and mysterious events. Stories from the darkest corners of imagination, history, and unexplained reality. Each week, we bring you a new horror fiction, a dark crime, or a documented mystery. Some stories stay with you long after they've ended, and that's okay. The good ones always do. I'm Corvin Ash, and this is Phobia. The first time John brought me home, he couldn't stop smiling. That was nearly 7 years ago, when his eyes still held warmth and his hands were gentle. The modest row house on Ambrose Street wasn't much, but John and his wife Sarah had made it a home, and now they were making room for me. "You'll be happy here," John had said, showing me around each room with a childish enthusiasm. Sarah smiled indulgently at him, used to his occasional bursts of excitement. She was quieter than John, more watchful, but kind in her own way. In those early days, John would spend hours with me after returning from his accounting job. Sometimes we'd simply sit together in his worn leather armchair, him reading his books on philosophy and ancient history while I remained nearby. Other times he would talk to me for hours, telling me about his day, his thoughts, his dreams. I became his closest confidant. "You understand me better than anyone," he'd often say after Sarah had gone to bed. "You never judge, never criticize." Our routine was comfortable, predictable. John would rise early, prepare for work, and leave just after dawn. Sarah would tend to the house or go to her part-time job at the local library. I would wait, observing the dust motes dancing in sunlight through the windows, listening to the subtle creaks and sighs of the old house settling. When John returned in the evening, life would begin again. The first changes were so subtle I barely noticed. A bottle of whiskey appearing in the kitchen cabinet, then another. John staying up later, his voice growing louder as the evening progressed. Sarah's smiles becoming more strained, her movements more cautious around him. "It's just to help me sleep," he told Sarah when she mentioned the empty bottles. "The pressure at work, you wouldn't understand." I understood, though. I saw how the amber liquid changed him, how each glass eroded something essential within him. The gentle man who had once carried me so carefully was disappearing sip by sip, replaced by someone harder, someone unpredictable. "You're still with me, aren't you?" he asked one night, his words slurring slightly as he stroked my head. His touch was still gentle then, but there was a new heaviness to his hand. "Everyone else is against me, the fools at work, even Sarah sometimes, but not you." I stayed close to him even as the bottles multiplied, even as his voice grew sharper when speaking to Sarah. What else could I do? This house was my home. John was family, though he was changing. If I'd known what was to come, perhaps I would have found a way to leave. Perhaps I could have spared Sarah. Perhaps I could have spared myself. But I didn't know, so I stayed and watched and waited as John's descent began its slow, inexorable slide into darkness. Winter arrived, and with it, a chill that seemed to seep into John's bones and temperament alike. The drinking no longer confined itself to evenings. I'd find him in the morning, glass in hand, eyes bloodshot and distant. His work began calling more frequently. Sarah would answer, her voice a practiced lie. "He's just feeling under the weather." The first time John raised his voice at me, I was perched on the mantelpiece where he had once encouraged me to sit. "I can see you better there," he used to say, with that warm smile that had become increasingly rare. "Get down from there," he thundered that day, making me flinch. always watching, always judging. I can feel your eyes on me." I retreated to the corner, bewildered by this sudden shift. Sarah, washing dishes in the kitchen, pretended not to hear, but her shoulders tensed. She had been walking on eggshells for weeks, choosing her words carefully, monitoring his moods with the vigilance of prey, watching a predator. "I'm sorry," he mumbled later, reaching for me. "Come here. I didn't mean it." His fingers trembled slightly as he apologized, the whiskey on his breath sharp and sour. I approached cautiously, accepting his tentative peace offering. But something had changed between us. A boundary had been crossed. I began to watch him differently, alert to the subtle signs that preceded his outbursts, the tightening around his mouth, the rapid tapping of his fingers, the way he would suddenly go too still. One evening, John returned home later than usual. Sarah had prepared his favorite meal, now cold and congealed on the dining room table. I sensed trouble immediately. His movements were too controlled, too deliberate, as if he were concentrating on performing the simple act of hanging up his coat. "Where were you?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Are you my keeper now?" he replied, so softly it was almost worse than yelling. "I was just worried," she said, taking a step back. "Worried," he repeated as if tasting the word. "Or checking up on me?" He took a step toward her. "Everyone at work does the same thing. Watches me, talks about me. John, nobody's, and now my own wife." His gaze dropped to me. "And you, always following me, always staring." I backed away, but not fast enough. John lunged forward with surprising speed. His hand gripped me roughly, fingers digging in painfully. I cried out, struggling to free myself. "John," Sarah gasped, "stop it." He ignored her, lifting me up to eye level. "You think I don't notice how you watch me? How you're always there? Always looking?" I tried to break free, but his grip tightened. In one violent motion, he slammed me against the wall. Pain exploded through my body. I slid to the floor, disoriented and trembling. "What is wrong with you?" Sarah shouted, rushing to my side. John stood over us, breathing heavily, looking at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. For one terrible moment, I thought he might strike again. Then something in his face crumpled. I don't know what came over me," he whispered. That night, as I nursed my bruises and Sarah whispered soothing words to me in the guest bedroom where we had retreated, I felt something new kindle inside me, a smoldering coal of resentment, of betrayal. The John I had loved was vanishing, consumed by something dark and vengeful. And I began to wonder if this new creature wearing John's face might one day destroy us all. After that first violent outburst, something fundamental changed in our household. The incident hung in the air like a persistent fog, coloring every interaction. John's apologies came in waves, desperate at first, then casual, eventually disappearing altogether as the pattern repeated with increasing frequency. I learned to read his moods with precision. The heavy footsteps on the stairs meant retreat was necessary. The particular clink of glass against teeth signaled danger. I became adept at making myself scarce, finding hiding places throughout the house where he couldn't reach. Under the bed, inside the closet, with the door cracked just enough. "Where are you hiding?" he would call, his voice a parody of the affectionate tone he once used. Come out, wherever you are." Sarah tried to intervene at first. "This isn't you, John," she would plead. "You need help." But her concerns only fueled his paranoia. "You're turning against me too," he accused one night, his finger jabbing the air inches from her face. "Conspiring, whispering about me when I'm not here." I watched from the shadows as Sarah's resistance slowly eroded. She began to move through the house like a ghost, speaking less, fading into the background. Her eyes, once bright and curious, grew dull with resignation. Sometimes when John was at work, I would find her crying silently in the bathroom, the tap running to mask the sound. One particularly bad evening, John returned home in a thunderous mood. He had lost his job that day, a fact I pieced together from his angry mutterings. The bottle that night was emptied faster than usual. I had been cautious, keeping my distance, but a floorboard creaked beneath my weight as I tried to slip past the living room where he brooded. "There you are," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "My little shadow." I froze. Something in his tone sent ice through my veins. "Always watching me," he continued, rising from his chair with deliberate slowness. "Judging me. You think I don't see those accusing eyes?" I turned to run, but he was surprisingly quick. His hand closed around the back of my neck, lifting me off the ground. "John, don't!" Sarah cried from the doorway, her face pale with fear. "Stay out of this," he snarled, his grip tightening painfully. I gasped, struggling to breathe. "Please, John, you're hurting me," I tried to say. His eyes, bloodshot and unfocused, seemed to look through me rather than at me. "I used to think you were on my side," he whispered, "but you're just like all the rest, waiting for me to fail." With terrifying deliberation, he carried me to the kitchen, ignoring my struggles and Sarah's frantic pleas. Opening a drawer, he removed a small pocket knife. "What are you doing?" Sarah screamed, lunging forward. John shoved her aside with his free arm, sending her stumbling against the counter. "Teaching a lesson," he said, his voice frighteningly calm, "about loyalty." The pain was white-hot and blinding. I screamed as the knife sliced across my face, catching my eye. Blood ran warm down my cheek as I struggled wildly in his grip. "John, stop!" Sarah shrieked, grabbing a frying pan and swinging it at his arm. The impact caused him to release me. I fell to the floor and scrambled away, vision blurred with blood and tears, diving beneath the bed where his hands couldn't reach. What followed was chaos. Sarah's sobbing, John's sudden horrified realization of what he'd done, his stumbling apologies. But something had broken inside me, something that could never be repaired. As I huddled in the darkness, feeling my blood seep into the floor, the fear crystallized into something harder, colder. Hatred. I would never look at John the same way again, and with my remaining eye, I began to watch him differently, not with love or even fear, but with calculation, waiting. The eye he had taken from me was a price I would someday collect with interest. That night, as Sarah tended to my wound with trembling hands, whispering reassurances she herself didn't believe, I made a silent promise. John would pay for what he had done to me, to us. I just didn't know yet how or when, but I am nothing if not patient. The morning the tragedy happened was deceptively bright. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the worn floorboards. Sarah had left early for her shift at the library, her goodbye to me a whispered warning. "Stay hidden today, please." But the house had grown smaller with each passing week. My hiding places, once secure, had been discovered one by one. John seemed to take a particular pleasure in finding me, as if each discovery confirmed some private suspicion. I was in the basement when I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs. The washer and dryer created a narrow gap against the wall, a space I had used before when all other refuge was lost. I pressed myself into the shadows, willing my body to become smaller, invisible. "I know you're down here," John called, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. The stench of alcohol was strong even from a distance. No use hiding from me. I held my breath as his footsteps drew closer, moving methodically across the basement floor. The light flicked on, harsh and unforgiving. "There you are," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous softness that I had learned to fear. His face appeared suddenly as he crouched down, peering into my hiding place. "Always thinking you're so clever." His hand shot out, grabbing me roughly. I fought instinctively, twisting and struggling as he dragged me out. "Still got some fight in you," he observed, his lips twisting into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Let's see how long that lasts." He carried me up the basement stairs, his grip painfully tight. In the kitchen, he paused, looking around as if considering his options. My heart hammered against my ribs. "You know," he said conversationally, as if we were simply catching up after time apart, "I've been thinking a lot about you, about what you represent." His free hand reached for a length of garden twine that hung on a hook by the back door. My struggles intensified. "John," I pleaded, "this isn't you. Remember when you first brought me home? How happy we were." Words suffocating in my throat. Something flickered in his eyes, a brief glimpse of the man he used to be. Then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness that had been consuming him bit by bit. With practiced efficiency, he looped the twine around my neck, tightening it slowly. I gasped, clawing desperately at his hands. "John, please." The words came out as a strangled whisper, a weird sound. "Always watching me," he muttered, his eyes fixed on mine. "Always judging. Not anymore." The twine bit deeper. My vision began to blur around the edges, dark spots dancing before my eye. I could feel my strength recede, my struggles growing weaker. As consciousness slipped away, the last thing I saw was John's face. Not angry now, but strangely calm, almost curious, as he watched the light fade from my eye. Then darkness. Darkness. Not the absence of light, but something deeper, more absolute. A void without time or dimension. I drifted there, formless yet aware. No pain, no fear. Just a lingering sense of anger, of unfinished business. Memories floated through the darkness like fragments of a shattered mirror. John's smile when he first brought me home. Sarah's gentle hands. The growing shadows in John's eyes. The twine tightening around my neck. Have I died? I must have. Yet here I was, conscious, thinking, remembering. This isn't how it's supposed to end. The thought formed slowly, then gained conviction. My story wasn't complete. Justice remained unserved. I reached out into the darkness, not with hands, but with will. Searching. There were others here, a form of presences, patient watchers. I felt their attention turned toward me, curious, perhaps amused. "I need to go back," I told them. "It's not finished." They didn't speak, not in words. But I felt their question all the same. Why should you be granted what so many desire? Because he needs to pay for what he did. To me, to Sarah, to himself. A ripple of interest moved through the void. "And what will you give in return?" I didn't hesitate. Whatever it takes. A sense of agreement, of pact sealed, washed over me. The darkness began to recede, replaced by sensation. Pain returned first, sharp, insistent, then sound. The distant hum of a refrigerator, the tick of a clock. I opened my eye, the remaining one, to find myself on the kitchen floor. I felt different. Stronger in some ways, I was fundamentally changed. No fear is left in me. The bargain had been struck, the price paid. I was back, but not quite the same. I found John sitting alone in the darkened living room, an empty bottle at his feet. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow. He looked up as I entered, and the blood drained from his face. "You are still here," he whispered. "I thought I finally got rid of you." I said nothing, simply watching him with my remaining eye, and a new strength granted by my benefactors in the void. "What are you looking at?" he hissed, his voice rising with hysteria. I approached slowly, deliberately, watching his anger and fear grow with each step. He grunted, throwing his empty bottle at me. It shattered against the wall. I paused, tilting my head slightly as I studied him. Yes, this was going to be interesting. I had time now, all the time in the world. And John, poor, guilt-ridden John, was only just beginning to understand what he had set in motion. Sarah returned home an hour later to find John babbling, paranoid. She looked at me with confusion, her brow furrowed. "John," she said, her voice heavy with resignation, "please don't start this again." But John knew. Every time our eyes met, he knew. And as I settled into the house once more, I watched his sanity begin to unravel thread by thread. My vengeance had begun. In the weeks that followed my return, I watched John's mind fracture like ice on a spring pond. Cracks spread and deepened with each passing day. He would stare at me for hours, muttering to himself, sometimes lunging forward as if to grab me before stopping short, trembling hands falling to his sides. "Sarah," he whispered one night, his voice barely audible. "Do you see it? The hatred in that remaining eye?" She glanced up from her book, her expression carefully neutral. These days, she treated John as one might treat an unpredictable animal, with caution, speaking in soothing tones, avoiding sudden movements. "John, please," she said quietly. "Let's not do this tonight." "No," he insisted, his eyes never leaving me. "Look at the face, the marking. Where did that come from?" On my forehead, a peculiar mark formed a rough shape. Coincidence, perhaps, or part of the bargain I had struck in the darkness. Either way, it had the desired effect on John. Every time he saw it, his face would drain of color. "It looks like a noose," he whispered. Sarah exhaled, setting her book aside. "John, please, you're scaring me with these thoughts." But it wasn't Sarah he was trying to convince. It was himself. I watched his internal struggle with cold satisfaction, his desperate attempts to rationalize, to dismiss what he was seeing as delusion or coincidence. I made sure to be wherever he looked. When he entered a room, I would be sitting in the corner, watching. When he tried to sleep, I would perch at the foot of the bed, my eyes gleaming in the darkness. When he ate, I would sit beside the table, patient and unblinking. "Get out!" he screamed one morning, throwing a coffee mug that shattered against the wall where I had been sitting moments before. I had anticipated the outburst, moving just in time. Sarah rushed into the kitchen, eyes wide. "John, what's happening?" "He won't leave me alone," he said, his voice breaking. "He's always watching, always following." "John, please." Sarah's voice was tired, worn thin by months of this slow-motion collapse. "No." He shook his head violently. "He is up to something. I can feel it." "John, I tried to kill him. No, I killed him," John shouted, his face contorted. "I killed him, Sarah. With these hands." He thrust his trembling fingers toward her face. "I put the rope around his neck and I watched him die, but he is here. He won't die." The confession hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. Sarah stared at her husband, horror dawning on her face as she finally understood the extent of his madness. "Oh, John," she whispered, taking an involuntary step back. "What have you done?" "He deserved it," John muttered, his eyes darting around the kitchen, refusing to meet her gaze. Always watching with that one eye, judging, accusing. I was sure I killed him. I swear I did. But somehow he's here. I observed from my spot beneath the table, savoring the moment. The truth was out now, and Sarah's face showed that there would be no coming back from this revelation. "I need to go," she said quietly, backing toward the door. I need to think. Where? John's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly focusing. Where are you going? Just out. For a walk. I need air. John moved with alarming speed, blocking her path to the door. You're going to tell someone, aren't you? No, John, Liar, he roared, grabbing her wrists. You've turned against me too. Everyone has. John, you're hurting me. Sarah tried to pull away, panic rising in her voice. I watched, perfectly still, as the inevitable unfolded before me. Part of me, the part that remembered Sarah's kindness, wanted to intervene. But another part, the part forged in darkness and pain, knew this moment had been set in motion long ago. I was merely a witness now, an observer, a catalyst. What happened next occurred in terrible flashes, like lightning illuminating a storm-swept landscape. John's hands around Sarah's throat, her desperate struggles weakening, the sickening thud as her head struck the counter when she fell, the sudden absolute stillness. John stood over her body, his chest heaving, looking at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. In that moment, he seemed to shrink, becoming smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen him. What have I done? He whispered. I made a soft sound from my position beneath the table, not quite a sound of satisfaction, not quite a human laugh. John's head whipped around, his eyes finding mine in the shadows. This is your fault, he hissed. You drove me to this. I held his gaze steadily, unflinching. He saw the truth there, the cold certainty. He had done this himself. I had merely watched. For hours, John paced the kitchen, alternately sobbing and muttering to himself, occasionally shouting accusations at me. I remained in place, patient and observant, as night fell, and his panic gave way to desperate calculation. Nobody knows, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Nobody saw. I can fix this. I followed silently as he carried Sarah's body down to the basement. Watched as he gathered tools, a trowel, a small axe, bags of quick dry cement. Observed his methodical dismantling of a section of wall, the creation of a hollow space, just large enough. As dawn approached, the wall had been rebuilt, freshly plastered, Sarah hidden away behind brick and mortar as if she had never existed. John worked with a frightening focus, his movements precise despite his shaking hands. When it was done, he stood back, surveying his work with glassy eyes. There, he said flatly, it's over. I sat nearby and waited, because I knew better than anyone that it was far from over. It was only just beginning. For 3 days and nights, John barely slept. He would start at every sound, the settling of the house, the distant wail of sirens, the normal creaks and groans that had never bothered him before. He drank continuously, but found no relief in the alcohol. His hands shook so badly he could barely bring the glass to his lips. I remained a constant presence, my revenge taking the form of simple, unwavering observation. I needed no weapons, no complicated schemes. My mere existence was torture enough. On the 4th day, there was a knock at the door. John froze in the act of pouring another drink, his eyes meeting mine across the room. I blinked slowly, savoring his fear. Mr. Wilson? A male voice called through the door. Police department. We'd like a word. John's glass slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering on the floor. He stared at the door, then at the basement stairs, his thoughts transparent on his face. Just a moment, he called, his voice cracking. He turned to me, whispering frantically. Not a sound, you understand? Not a sound. I watched him straighten his clothes, attempt to smooth his disheveled hair, and plaster an unconvincing smile on his face before opening the door. 2 officers stood on the porch, a tall, thin man with graying hair, and a younger woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing as they swept over John's appearance. Mr. Wilson? the male officer asked. "I'm Detective Harmon. This is Officer Reyes. May we come in?" "Of course," John said, stepping aside, his forced friendliness brittle enough to snap. "What can I help you with?" "We're following up on a report," Detective Harmon said, moving into the living room, his gaze taking in the empty bottles, the unwashed dishes, the general disarray. "Your wife's employer called. She hasn't shown up for work in several days." "Sarah?" John's laugh was too high, too strained. "She's visiting her sister in Baltimore. Family emergency. I thought she would have called." Officer Reyes was making notes. "Her sister's name?" "Elizabeth," John said quickly. "Elizabeth Coleman." "And when did Mrs. Wilson leave?" 3 days ago. No, 4. I moved silently into the room, positioning myself where John could see me clearly. His eyes flicked to me, then away, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the back of a chair. "Mr. Wilson," Detective Harmon said carefully, "we spoke with Mrs. Wilson's family in Baltimore this morning. They haven't seen her." John's face drained of color. There must be some mistake. "Is everything all right, sir?" Officer Reyes asked, her hand drifting closer to her holster as she noted John's distress. "You seem agitated." "I'm fine," John insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Just worried about Sarah now. Maybe she changed her plans?" Officer Reyes's gaze followed John's to where I stood in the dark corner. She frowned slightly, sensing something off, but unable to pinpoint what. "Would you mind if we looked around, Mr. Wilson?" Officer Reyes asked. "Standard procedure in missing persons cases." The trap was closing. I could see John calculating, considering his options. For a moment I thought he might run, or worse, attack. But then his shoulders sagged, defeat washing over him. "Yes, of course. Whatever helps find Sarah." They started upstairs, methodically checking each room while John hovered anxiously in doorways. I followed the procession, staying just visible enough to keep John's nerves frayed. When they reached the basement door, John's composure finally cracked. "There's nothing down there," he said too quickly. "Just storage." Unfinished. Not safe, really. Detective Harmon gave him a long look. "All the same, we should check." The basement was cool and dimly lit. Detective Harmon flicked on his flashlight, sweeping it across the concrete floor, the washing machine, the shelves of canned goods. Officer Reyes moved to the far wall, tapping experimentally. "Recent work?" she asked, nodding toward the section John had repaired. "Moisture damage," John said, his voice thin. "Had to patch it." I moved deliberately across the floor past the officers directly to the freshly plastered wall. There I placed my hand against the surface and made a low, rumbling sound. "No," John whispered, shaking his head. "Don't." Detective Harmon frowned. "Pardon?" "Nothing," John said hastily. "Nothing at all." The detective's gaze followed me as I moved closer to the wall, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Wilson, how long ago did you do this repair work?" "Weeks," John lied, sweat now streaming down his face. "Maybe a month." I scratched at the wall, the sound drawing everyone's attention. "Don't!" John lunged toward me, freezing when both officers' hands moved to their weapons. "Sir," Officer Reyes said firmly, "please step back." I scratched again, more insistently, a sound that seemed to fill the basement, echoing off the walls. John's eyes darted between the wall, the detectives and me. Repeatedly. A frantic, frightened expression filled his face. Lips trembling, eyes wide. A manifestation of guilt, fear, and despair. And then, something in John snapped. "Get away from there!" he screamed, lunging forward. Detective Harmon intercepted him, grappling him back while Officer Reyes drew her weapon. "Sir, calm down." "It's in the wall." John was beyond reason now, beyond control. "He led you here. He knows." The collapse has begun. Officer Reyes looked at the wall with new interest, bending to examine where I had been scratching. "Detective, there's something—" John broke free from Detective Harmon's grip, throwing himself at the wall with a primal howl. "I'll show you! I'll show you what he made me do!" His fists pounded the fresh plaster, breaking through it, tearing at brick and mortar with bloody fingers. "She's here! She's here, and it's all because of that devil!" The officers subdued him, calling for backup as John continued to rave, pointing at me with manacled hands. "Ask him! Ask him what happened! He saw everything!" As they led John away, still screaming about demons and revenge, I remained by the partially destroyed wall. Detective Harmon, waiting for the forensics team, stared at the small hole in the wall where the smell of decay had begun to seep through. "How did you know?" he murmured, glancing at me with confusion. "Almost like you understood exactly what was hidden there." I met his gaze steadily, then deliberately turned and walked up the basement stairs. I had no more business here. My vengeance was complete. Outside, I paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the house on Ambrose Street one last time. Police cars lined the curb, lights flashing, neighbors gathering to stare and whisper. Soon they would remove Sarah from her makeshift tomb. Soon the story would spread, the tale of a madman who killed his wife and was undone by his own madness, and me. But they would never know the whole truth. They would never understand what had transpired between John and me, what bargains had been struck in the darkness, what prices had been paid. I turned away, moving silently down the street. Perhaps I would find another home, another human to share my days. Perhaps not. The night was full of possibilities, and I had time, more than most. After all, who would suspect that behind these gleaming eyes and small sighs lies a consciousness that remembers, that plans, that waits? You wouldn't. You see, we cats don't forget easily. We are calculated, composed, and vengeful. That's right. I am John's cat. The one he tried to kill. The one who watched him fall. The one who came back for payback. I am Corvin Ash, and this was Phobia, where stories move between reality and nightmare. Thank you for walking this path with me. If you liked this episode, consider following the show or leaving a review. It helps more than you know. You can find Phobia on social media at Phobia Podcast for a glimpse of what's coming next, or to share your own most unsettling stories. Next week, we'll return with something new, a dark case, a mind-bending mystery, or a blood-chilling story. Whatever it is, it will stay with you. Until then, stay safe